Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. It's now time for Believe It or Not. Love this segment when Heath gives us a statement and we tell you,
believe it
or not. Chris Towers joining us as well, so let's get right to it. Here we go. First statement, believe it or not, Patrick Mahomes is no longer a must-start quarterback. I cannot believe we are saying that, Heath.
Well, I mean, after what he's done for the last 3 weeks, we don't have much choice but to say that. He's not top 16 fantasy points in his last 3 games. He has 5 games this season averaging below 6 yards per pass attempt. Coming into this year, he had 2 of those games in his entire career. So it is broken in Kansas City. I'm not saying it's going to stay broken, but the problem is I can't believe it because of how bad the streaming quarterbacks have been so far this season. And I just think if you would have streamed the top 2 or 3 streamers this week over Patrick Mahomes, most of them were worse than him. Tyrod Taylor was worse than him. Daniel Jones was worse than him.
Carson Wentz
was the one guy who would have been better. I think the only thing you can do at this point is the same thing the Chiefs have to do, is just hope they get it figured out in time to get you to sneak into the playoffs. Because if you get to the playoffs as a 6th seed and Mahomes is Mahomes, then you're fine. It doesn't matter that you're the 6th seed. But you can't start benching him now.
All right, Chris. So trade deadline is approaching in a lot of fantasy leagues. If you are struggling at the quarterback position and the Patrick Mahomes fantasy manager has another option on their team and is willing to part with Mahomes, are you looking to be actively trying to acquire him?
Yeah, I think anytime you have a player with a track record of someone like Patrick Mahomes at the bottom of their value, you should be trying to acquire them. And in this case, I can't imagine things are going to get worse for Patrick Mahomes than they've been the last 2 weeks. One thing that I have noticed, he's had lower than 7.5 intended air yards per target in 5 of his last 6 games. Last season, he had lower than 7.5 yards in all but 4, or higher than 7.5 yards in all but 4 of his games. So clearly the move that opposing defenses have made to take away the big play has been an issue for this team. And one thing you're seeing is that when he does throw deep, there was one play in the second quarter, I believe Tyreek Hill specifically, where he had Travis Kelce open in the intermediate range, but he wanted to throw deep to Tyreek Hill, even though he was double covered. In his career, that's tended to work out for Patrick Mahomes. It just hasn't recently. I think given the track record, given the fact that we've got 3 years of him as the best quarterback in the NFL, I think you have to bet on him turning it around. So if someone makes him available and isn't asking for the moon, I think you probably try to trade for him.
All right, we'll find out. Gets the Raiders this week. Dallas in week 11. Still has his bye in week 12, so you got to factor that in as well. And then Denver, Raiders again, Chargers again. I mean, just based on fantasy points allowed, that's a lot of red. A lot of teams that have been really good against opposing quarterbacks. So we'll see if Mahomes turns it around. It's actually 3 straight games of 16 fantasy points or less for Mahomes. So obviously not giving you the return on investment as the first quarterback drafted in the majority of leagues. All right, let's go to the Eagles running back situation. Believe it or not, Jordan Howard is the best running back on the Eagles until Miles Sanders returns.
I think you have to believe it. I think there's a risk here that they get into a situation where they're chasing points and they actually throw the ball a lot. But they've now gone 2 weeks in a row where they've had more than double the number of rush attempts than pass attempts. And in that scenario, Jordan Howard is the best option. You compare him to the track record of Boston Scott. Jordan Howard had 3 straight seasons of 250-plus carries. Scott's never had more than 80 in a year. So he's the primary running down back, and you just look at their schedule over the next 3 weeks. The Broncos, the Saints, and the Giants, I don't think there's an offense there that's going to have them chasing points and getting out of the run game. I feel pretty secure with Howard in that same Devontae Freeman high-end flex, low-end number 2 running back range until we see Miles Sanders return.
All right, Chris. So we saw everybody run to the waiver wire to pick up Boston Scott. The week before that, it was Kenneth Gainwell. We're at now the 3rd week in a row. Is Jordan Howard going to be one of the most added players?
I guess week 10 is going to be Kenny Gainwell's week, huh? Yeah, no, I think Jordan Howard absolutely should be one of the most added waiver wire players this week. I think he's probably, I don't know if he's a high or low end number 2 or high end flex. I think I'd probably be more in the 30 range with him just because if he doesn't get you a touchdown, he's really not going to do anything. And one thing that I noticed in yesterday's game, he was on the field for 17 run plays, and he ran the ball 17 times, Jordan Howard did. Boston Scott was on the field for 14 run plays, and he carried the ball on 10 of those 14. So what I think we might be seeing is the defense is really keying in on Jalen Hurts in those read options. They run so many of their run plays in read option situations that I think there might be more of a defensive focus on Jalen Hurts, which is letting Jordan Howard have a little bit more running room. But if they keep feeding it to Jordan Howard this way, defenses are eventually going to pick up on that fact and maybe start keying in on him a little more. So that's one thing to keep in mind with his, relatively fast start, especially near the goal line.
All right. Based on just snap counts, Boston Scott actually played more than Jordan Howard against the Chargers. 44% for Scott, 40% for Howard, and 19% Kenneth Gainwell. Here's the Twitter poll. Believe it that Jordan Howard is the best running back on the Eagles until Miles Sanders returns. Let's go now to our next topic, and this guy has really been struggling, but believe it or not, Mike Williams is a boom or bust flex once again. So not a must-start receiver anymore. He's now down to flex category.
I'm not even sure he's a must-start wide receiver if you start 3 wide receivers. And boom or bust, he's got 4 games over 22 fantasy points. He's got 4 games under 8. That's the definition of boom or bust. The problem is 4 of his last 5 games with 5 targets or fewer. And in those games, 2 catches or fewer in all 4 of the games. He's just not the same. Apparently, he's got some sort of knee injury that he's just been playing through, which Mike Williams has been playing through injuries for most of his career. I just think if you look at his role right now in this offense, he can't be anything more than a complete boom or bust flex.
Chris, we may see some fantasy managers starting to drop Mike Williams in some 10-team leagues, some shallower formats, maybe in some 12-team leagues if you're stuck with bye weeks and injuries, etc. If you see him on waivers, you picking him up? Do you have any confidence that he's going to turn things around?
Yeah, I probably would. I don't know if confidence is the right word, but I do believe in Mike Williams' talent. What we're seeing over the last 5 games is in the first 3, his average depth of target was below 10 yards. He was being used more like a traditional number 1 wide receiver, not just that field stretching guy. Over the last 5 games, he's averaging 14.4 yards per target on intended air yards. So clearly he's moved back into the realm of the deep threat guys, which makes him someone you can't really rely on in any given week, someone that you're hoping hits that big play and finds the end zone. But we have also seen them use him as that alpha number 1 wide receiver this season. And so at any point, he could go back to being used that way. So I wouldn't want to drop him if I see him out there. Look, I put in a couple of claims on Brandon Ayuk last week. I'm always going to bet on talent at wide receiver if it's available on the waiver wire.
Chargers don't seem to be betting on talent, though, based on the targets. 5, 5, and 5 each of the last 3 weeks. He had the 16-target game against the Browns in week 5, and then 4 targets the game before that against the Raiders, which is really when things started to go south for him. So getting very hard to trust Mike Williams moving forward. I agree with you, Chris. If he's available, you probably take a flyer on him. But how many times we continue just to wait for him to live up to what some of the expectations have been, not just this season, but in his career? And as you see, fantasy managers are agreeing with Heath. Mike Williams is a boom or bust flex once again. Believe it. Let's go to our final topic here, and we got Hunter Renfrow. So believe it or not, Hunter Renfrow is going to be a top 24 wide receiver rest of season. So we know the story. No more Henry Ruggs. Renfrow the guy?
It's full PPR only, but yes, I do think he will be a top 24 wide receiver. He's shown such a good floor of right around 10 PPR fantasy points, but he's also scoring touchdowns on a semi-regular basis and being used in the red zone. Right now, this offense is basically throw the ball to Darren Waller, throw the ball to Hunter Renfrow, throw the ball to running backs. It's kind of what it used to be. Now, Deshaun Jackson might change that a little bit, but that's not a guy who's ever been a high target guy. If anything, I think Jackson might open things up again for Renfrow like he had earlier in the year, and his yards per catch, yards per target might go back up to where it was. He won't be a high-end number 2 wide receiver, but if he stays healthy, I think one of those Jarvis Landry seasons where he's somewhere between 18 and 24 in store for Hunter Renfrow.
Jalen Waddle, Cole Beasley, guys that we're seeing this year where you're getting, not necessarily a lot of production, but enough production in PPR to sort of carry you. So, Chris, in terms of where Hunter Renfrow is rest of season, let's talk about the other side of this, though. Half PPR, non-PPR. Can you trust him in those formats?
No. I mean, he doesn't have more than 60 yards in a game in the last 5 weeks. He has 2 games with more than 58. The targets are nice. The fact that he's getting, upwards of 8 to 9 targets nearly every week. The fact that he's catching, 5 to 7 balls every week. But he's just been so inefficient. I mean, 7.5 yards per target, 10 yards per reception. If the volume slips at all, if he goes from 7 or 8 or 9 targets per game to 5, 6, or 7, all of a sudden you're looking at a guy who's super fringy. I just think there's very, very little margin for error here with Hunter Renfrow. In a PPR league, yeah, I think it's possible he ends up in the top 24 by the end of the season, but I don't think I'm going to rank him in the top 24 most weeks. I think he's probably going to be around 30 in that Cole Beasley range. I'd rather have Waddle in that same range. I might rather have Jarvis Landry. I think he's a better player, although the pass volume is much different in Cleveland than in Las Vegas. So that's the one difference. But I think he's in that group, and that group is relatively uninspiring.
All right, so we'll find out. Certainly, he's got an opportunity this week to help fantasy managers based on the guys that are injured, guys that are on a bye, and we'll see how Deshaun Jackson fits and if he's active for the Raiders right away after being expected to sign with the team for this week. Let's show you the Twitter poll here regarding Hunter Renfrow. Do we have one for that one, Heath?
We do not.
We do not have one for Hunter Renfrow, so get on that. Let's get a poll going.